Let's take a look at the circuit diagram for our project where we'll be using a button to control an LED. Let's start with the button. One pin on the button is connected to ground and we'll be using pin 14 on the Raspberry Pi. The other end of the button will be connected to pin 16 on the Raspberry Pi. That is right after the pin 14 on the right hand side. Next, for our LED, the shorter pin or the cathode will be grounded and we'll be using pin 9 on the Raspberry Pi. The anode or the longer pin is connected to a 330 ohm resistor and the other end of that resistor is going to be connected to pin 11 on our Raspberry Pi. So we'll have 4 connections that will need to be made to our Raspberry Pi in this project. That completes the discussion for the circuit diagram for our project. Let's proceed to wire up our circuit for our project. First, we'll connect the push button switch to our breadboard. Right, so let's connect that over the gap. Okay, once it's firmly in place, one end of the switch goes to ground, so we'll make sure and first connect one of the pins. Ensure it's along the same row. This is grounded via pin 14 on the Raspberry Pi. So pin 14 is the 7th pin down on the right from the Raspberry Pi. So again, remember, ensure your Raspberry Pi is powered off when you're making any connections. So let's go to the right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so we'll make that connection to pin 14 on a Raspberry Pi. The other end of our switch has to go to pin 16 on the Raspberry Pi. So I'll go ahead and make that connection now. So again, make sure it's lined up along the same row as our button. And now the pin 16 is right under our grounded connection on the right. So that completes the wiring for our button. Next up, let's get our LED. So again, remember for the LED, there is a longer pin and a short pin. In this case, the long pin on the bottom here is our anode and the shorter pin on the top is the cathode. So just remember, polarity matters when you're connecting an LED, so be sure to connect those properly. So I'm just going to insert my LED in the breadboard. From the cathode of our LED, we're going to pin 9 on the Raspberry Pi. So I'll just make that connection now. Here is that cathode, and we go along the same row. And pin 9 on the Raspberry Pi is the 5th pin down on the left. So we count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Make that connection. Then we have to connect our resistor. So here's my 330 ohm resistor. We connect that to the anode. And then along the same line, the other end we can place anywhere else on the breadboard. And from that line, we have to go to pin 11 on the Raspberry Pi. So I'll make sure we line it up. And pin 11 is right under our ground connection on the left. Once you have double checked everything and made sure that your circuit is wired up correctly, we can proceed now to boot up our Raspberry Pi.